What's up, guys? Pittsburgh by Shorts here, and today we're going to do a multi-deck tech for Mirrorverse. I'm joined today by Dan,
What's up, everybody?
and so we're going to go through two builds here. The first one, Dan will go over his 8-choice pure Mirrorverse, and then I'll take over with my Disney 100 and Mirrorverse just pure Disney build. So go ahead and take it away, Dan.
Alright, so this is kind of a pure Mirrorverse build, like Tanner was saying. If you don't own Pixar or Disney already, and you just end up getting a playset of this, I saw it's very, cheap. You can get one for, $150, so if you don't have any of those old cards to add to your deck, the 8-choice build is a great place to start. It's kind of the builds that Bushiroad wants to push you into playing. It plays a really clean game, kind of almost similar to like a Kanata Marine style, with a early play combo and a lot of just really clean utility zeros. But we also have some elevated soul trigger counts, a couple of neat little combo cards, and some other stuff that kind of just makes it a little interesting, fitting of a not legal set. So we'll move right along into the card by card here. We'll start off with your main plussing zero is this Violet. Similar to the Card and Spy family, you can twin drive with this by either paying one stock or putting the top card of your deck into clock when it attacks. So we're going to be generating a lot of extra stock early. We're going to need that when we hit level 2. And she also has some fun little interactions with some cards we'll talk about later. Notably, she's really good for paying out choice triggers, so even when we're playing her as like a crash lane later on, still a lot of value there. And then the card that I'm surprised I'm not playing 4 of is this Jack Sparrow. This guy does everything. So if all your characters are on trait, he gets an extra 3k power, putting him at 3-5 in any lane, as opposed to the like Aqua type cards that are only big in center. And then when he dies, you pay 1 and clock a character from your waiting room. All your characters are Mirrorverse or Disney, so you're good there. And then look at up to 4 cards from your deck, choose a 1 or higher, add it, and then also draw 1, ditch 1. Kind of similar to the quintuplets Ichika card.
Yeah, I just want to add in the fact that the Jack is so large, it's like a main way to clear the early zeros that your opponent plays. You have a slight way to manipulate power to make him a little bigger, so he can become a 4K at level 0 as well. So definitely have a good power line.
Yeah, a lot of the time, your opponent's not even killing this guy, so you're playing just by him living to the next turn. And then it's cool to keep him around for later, because setting that clock is going to become very relevant at level 2 if in case of emergency. But anyway, moving on to our next set of zeros here. We have our Brainstormer. Pretty simple salvage Brainstormer. And then at the start of the climax phase, you choose one of your characters, and it gets 500 power times its level. That's really good because we're early playing a lot in this deck, so a lot of your characters are going to start gaining 1500 instead of 5 really quick. But it can give you some issues at level 0, which is why a card like that Jack is really premium. You also have Rex here. When he's placed on stage from hand, if you have 2 or more other characters, you draw 1, drop 1. Really good filter. And then also when he attacks, you choose one of your characters. It gets 1000 power and hand encore. That's really good with the Violet we talked about last time. It's really good with your level 1 combo. And it's really good with our early play level 3 combo. Gives you a little bit of recursion, a little bit of protection for some of your more key cards. And the on-play filter is really good for getting you into climaxes. You also play 2 of this Rapunzel. We've got a pretty standard Rico effect here. Ditch 1, look at the top card of your deck, check its level, and then salvage equal to the level. We're kind of thin on zeros here. I think I'm at 17 if I'm counting correctly, so this is really good for recurring any of those zeros. It lets you mull a little bit more aggressively. and just gives you a little more selection as the game goes on. So we'll move into some one-ofs here. First of all, we've got Scrooge. Scrooge plays a very important part in this deck. He also helps you set clock, but unlike Jack, who clocks you like that's fresh new damage, he takes the damage you already have and modulates it a little bit by letting you pick up a card in your clock on play, and then clock a card from your hand. In addition, when he attacks, you choose one of your other characters, and it gets 500 times your number of other Mirrorverse or Disney characters, which is a pretty good amount of power. And for a card that you're going to be kind of just plopping down a lot as a free 0, it really helps you get over with those other lanes. We're also playing one Hades. Kind of similar to the Hololive Mio. We're looking at the top 2 cards of our deck when he comes into play, and then we can pretty much do whatever we want with them. Leave him there, mill him, whatever. And then also, instead of a drop search that Mio is, he is a drop salvage. So on play or on death, you can pay 1, ditch 1, pick up a card from your waiting room. Just a little bit of extra selection in case your Rapunzels aren't hitting your 3s and you need to pick some of those up. The dual timing is really good, and it also kind of helps you pay out choices on the backswing, so that's really nice. Moving on, we have our first Soul Trigger spotted. This is the card that scares the crap out of every Weiss Boomer in existence. It is Pack Filler with a Soul Trigger. We have Global 500 power to our Mirrorverse and Disney characters, and then pay 2 rest to grab a Mirrorverse or Disney card from your waiting room and add it back to hand. So a little bit of extra selection, and the power is actually really relevant in the early games. You can hit some pretty nice power thresholds with your level 1 combo with 500 extra in all lanes. And then pay 2 salvage also helps you get out of triggered choices and things like that. And plus when you just can't seem to hit a brainstorm. And then rounding out the zeros is our climax swap. Pretty simple 2k on play, on death climax swap. The dual timing is really good. It has all the same synergies with choice that I've been continuing to mention. And you'll probably find yourself needing specific climaxes as you enter the late game, so you'll be climax swapping a lot in this deck. So moving on to your level 1s here, we have 4 of Mickey. This is a TD combo, pretty simple, gains 3k power during your turn as long as you have another traded character. And then climax combo with the choice, you can salvage a character on attack, as long as you have 2 or more other. So not as restrictive as the original Disney combo at level 1, which required 3 or more other, which was a problem sometimes, especially when you're running lean on zeros. No problems with that here. Pretty basic, slam 3 of these down, kill whatever's in the opposing lanes, pick up some cards, and get ready for level 2. One of the more interesting cards in the deck is the 1-0 Anger. So this is a lot like Avatar State Aang in that this isn't a card you're going to be committing to the board very often. He's a perfectly formidable attacker when he is. During your turn, if you have 2 or more other, he gets 4k power. But the real star of the show here is the other continuous ability. If you have a CX with Choice Trigger in your climax area, we're gaining Choice Trigger in every zone. So you can shuffle these back into a deck with a card we're going to talk about into a second, and it kind of reminiscent of the Quintessential Quintuplets Nino deck. You can do some pretty nice things where you do these monster turns and generate like 3 extra stock for nothing. Combos really well with Violet, which we're running 4 of, and that's one of the main reasons we're running 4 of. Combos pretty well with Hades, letting you dig into more of these. Overall, just a really great card. Was talking to one of my locals about how this would play out, seeing as it's choice and not standby. A little bit of a less impactful trigger, but man, triggering a lot of extra choices over the game gets you a lot of extra stock and lets you do extra brainstorms, extra drop salvages. You can afford to pay 2 and salvage with that Scrooge we talked about, and it also kind of subsidizes some of your later game things where we're going to need a lot of stock entering the attack phase.
Yeah, I felt like this is a great way to grab those finishers early when it lets you play a little more aggressively with your hand when you use things like the card we're going to talk about here shortly to set up almost guaranteed free triggers that you can
Yeah,
get off with this. It's pretty insane.
it's definitely nice that they gave us a couple of costed playables to pick up with this. You find out that you're stocking or adding to hand too many of your key cards over the course of the game, and then all of a sudden you don't have any cards left to grab with your choice triggers. Um, but anyway, moving on to the last level 1 here, we have this mini. So this is kind of it's very reminiscent of the card from Quintuplets, the Nino that lets you shuffle back. Here, we're shuffling back 2 and giving 1,000 power, and then when it climaxes placed in our climax area, we can bounce this to choose a character and give it a soul. So early game, that really helps kind of rush down and modulate, helps your side attacks. So there's no real downside to playing this down. Your back row is not normally full unless you've got Scrooge and Brainstormer up, so we can just keep playing this down and then bouncing it back to hand. And while we do, you'll see we have a variety of level 3s to shuffle back. It'll become evident in a couple of slides why that's important, but we can also shuffle back Anger. Early game will probably be shuffling back to Anger, and then late game will kind of transition to shuffling back 1 level 3 of our choice and a copy of Anger. So moving on here, we have our backups. We are a board-based deck, as we'll see very soon, so we need some backups to protect our cards. These are the 2 of the better ones in the set. Mirrorverse did kind of get scuffed out of premium backups, but the ones we did get are pretty good. So starting off with Ian here, when you use his backup, if you have 5 or more climaxes with a choice trigger in your waiting room, you can pay the cost, which is 1 as opposed to the 2 this effect normally costs. And if you do, you can shuffle back all the cards in your waiting room into your deck, and then it's a 2/5 backup. So we're on 2 of Ian. Normally this kind of card would only be a 1 of, but we're on 2 of them. It gives you a lot of flexibility to maybe stock 1 in the early game, pumps your soul trigger count, and most importantly, make sure you always have that thing on you. You can get into some pretty compressed deck states in the late game with this deck due to all the extra stock you're generating and how lean your general game plan is. So you will have those turns where you trigger a bunch of choices and then you need to pay them out with Ian here and shuffle them all right back into your deck. And then our other backup of choice here is the 2/1 Alice backup, another 2/5 backup, and then we have pay 2, send 1 character from stage to waiting room to choose one of your characters over leveled characters and send it to the waiting room. We don't get a crazy amount of synergy off of this, but we do have these 2 nice 1-ofs that have effects that trigger when they're sent to waiting room. It's not going to come up a bunch of times where you really want to drop salvage right after you anti-change your opponent, but it could. So I decided to mention that. So now we're moving on to the star of the show here. Being a Disney set, of course, they gave Mickey some absolutely ridiculous card. So we are an early play as long as you have a copy of this in clock. So that is why Jack Sparrow and the level 0 Scrooge we talked about before are so integral to our early game plan. First climax combo, when it's placed on the stage, you pick up the choice that goes with it and then gain 1,000 power for the rest of the turn. And then the other climax combo, at the start of your attack phase, if you have the choice that this card gives you for free, and this is in your front row, you can pay cost, search your deck for a Mirrorverse character, place it on stage in any slot, shuffle your deck, and then this and the cards you summon both get -1 soul. So now I think we've revealed kind of why Mini is so integral to the deck. We're playing very low counts of 6 different level 3 cards that you can summon off of this Mickey. that all have various toolboxy effects, and that's really where the strength of this deck lies. So starting at 2, you kind of get access to all 6 of the featured cards here. They'll be swinging in with 1 less soul, but that's kind of fake because you're playing a 1k1 deck, and you also have the mini shuffling back cards bouncing and giving you soul. So you're still pushing a ton of damage. You're running 18 soul triggers because you're 8 choice. You have the mini and the Scrooge activating as extra soul triggers. It's easy to get like tunnel visioned in on like losing those 2 souls and what that might mean for your finishing turns. But I think with the way that I've built this deck out and other players have built this deck out, I think it's become pretty evident that losing those 2 souls, you really like make that up with the strength of the effects of the cards you're summoning and all the different like situations you become able to respond to at a moment's notice. So we'll start looking at some of the cards we're summoning with Mickey now. So your plan A is these are kind of the cards you're going to want to summon when Mickey's at level 2. So you have Goofy here. Goofy's got a lot of text on him. He gives your Mickey 2 separate abilities. The one is on attack, pay 1, ditch 1, look at the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck, pick 1, send it to the bottom, and put the rest back on top. So kind of like a cheaper bootleg Mocha effect. We're not Anya, but we're about 1/3 of an Anya here. Not too bad. And then also when you're playing Goofy, you're stock healing. You're discarding 1 to put the top card of your clock into stock. And then finally, all of your other Mirrorverse characters get 1500 power. You can also summon Rapunzel. Rapunzel, notably, is also an early play. I think in any other deck that's not specifically this one, you'd play much higher counts of this card because it's very good. Early play condition is having 2 or less or 6 or more climaxes in your waiting room, which is pretty easy. As long as you don't have 3, 4, or 5, you're good to go. And then she has a really nice power condition of just 2 or more other Mirrorverse or Disney characters to get 3k power cross turn. And then when she's placed on stage from hand or deck, you can choose one of the following 2 effects and resolve it. You can either heal 1 or refresh and get 2k power. So really nice little thing that lets you respond to kind of any situation that you're in. You can do extra heals that you might not. If you've already summoned out Goofy and you get an extra turn at 2, you can go into Rapunzel, depending on your deck state, either refresh or heal again. Kind of prolong your level 2 game like that. And then the body is pretty big, especially when you're picking up those backups we talked about earlier. You know, you're getting up to like 13, 14, 5 if you have Goofy, 15 if you have Goofy and Scrooge. So, very defensible card. And then finally, probably the most toxic option you can summon off of Mickey is Mr. Skellington. If he's in the front row, all of your Mirrorverse or Disney characters get 1000 and hexproof. So very shades of that time I got reincarnated as a slime. Not quite as much power as Goofy, that's why we're still running Goofy. In some situations, you're going to want to go into Goofy to have a more easily protectable Mickey to try to go again next turn. But summoning Jack has its benefits, like you don't have to fear anti-change, which is really nice. And then he also has this nice little kind of off-finisher effect stapled to him when when his battle opponent is reversed. You can pay 2 to deal 1 damage to your opponent. That triggers cross turn, so if you're winning board like you should, because of all your crazy on-turn power, and your opponent has to end up crashing things into Jack, you can always pay 2 and burn them again next turn to try to set up for a better finisher on the following turn. And then, so 3 more cards here. This is plan B, kill him. This is when you go right to level 3, you don't get to do your cool early play thing, and you're sitting on, like, Mickey and, like, 5 or 6 stock and a prayer. So starting off is Minnie. She's kind of the deck's more conventional finisher, where you're summoning her in better games off of Mickey or by playing her from hand. So if you have 2 or more other Mirrorverse or Disney characters, she gets 1500 power and hand encore, so pretty large body. And then when she's coming out from hand or deck, if you're level 3 or higher, you can pay 1 to shuffle back 4 cards in your opponent's waiting room and decompress them just like that. So kind of reminiscent, shades of Rushia, but not quite, since you can't do it. You can't do it early. Then we have Hercules here. During your turn, if you have 4 or more other Mirrorverse or Disney characters, Herc gets 3k power and a soul, so swinging in at 12, 5, 3 soul, 4 soul with climax, but 3 soul if you summon him off Mickey is pretty strong. And that really complements his second ability, which is when his damage is cancelled, you mill 1, and then deal X damage to your opponent, where X is equal to the level of the milled card plus 1. Pretty standard Musashi effect there. But when you're swinging in with 4 soul, it's a great first attack, especially if you feel like your first attack is likely to get cancelled. You get the quick ping off of the second effect there, and then you kind of go in with the other 2 lanes, having removed 2 climaxes from your opponent's deck, and also maybe having shuffled 4 back with Minnie. And then the last card here, we have Frank. Really slept on Frank when the set came out, but I'll go into a little bit of reasons why I think he's pretty essential for the deck after I explain what he does. So when he's placed on stage from hand or deck, you choose 1 character from your hand whose level is equal to or lower than your level, put it on the stage, and then Frank gets 2k power for the rest of the turn, which plays in very nicely to his second effect. On reverse, pay 2, ditch 2, burn 4. So what is that really doing for you? It's not a very assuming effect when you're reading it right off the bat. But when you think about that, you're spawning him in from your deck normally. So you're ignoring color requirement, which is good because we're not playing him if he's not coming in off of Mickey because we don't run any other green cards. You're also dropping a card from your hand for free, which is really lowering your stock threshold. And since all of your cards have on play from hand or deck effects, you're benefiting from all of those, whether you're shuffling back more cards with Minnie, or dropping a Herc over the Mickey that spawned Frank. These are all really good options to kind of extend your finishing turn in a deck that doesn't really have a very strong dedicated finishing turn, since you're kind of in this advantage generating mode with Mickey for most of the game. This kind of gives you an option of making a finishing push that's closer to real. We have a lot of really cracked finishers in White Schwartz right now, so this deck does not have those, but we do have burn 4, shuffle back 8 sometimes, and that can be just as good as long as it does 7 damage and kills them.
Yeah, the fact that he helps you get around the losing the soul by being able to spawn something over your Mickey that was minus a soul, bringing out that Hercules, that the Hercules has those 4 souls going into that attack, it gives you a lot more reach than you expect with this deck.
Yeah, you'd expect to lose a lot of reach running the combo that you're running, but in the end, you really just don't lose out on a lot of soul at all. And the burn 4 is exactly kind of what you need to help close out the game. Usually, you'll stick a lot of 1s, 2s, and 3s on those first couple attacks, and then you're right there with the 4. So moving on here to kind of just wrap up why I feel that this deck is so cool and crazy. Mickey, when evaluating this card, I kind of came to the conclusion that Mickey is as good as the deck lets him be. You're going to generate a lot of advantage. So what are you doing with it? How are you eventually going to close out the game? So right on his own, Mickey is a +1. He grabs you his own climax, and then through that climax, you're paying 1 stock to generate another level 3 card, all of which have really great on-play effects that all activate from deck or hand. So you're spawning a big body with mini, shuffling back, healing, elbow dropping in another card from your hand with Frank, swinging for big damage with Hercules, healing and protecting your board with Goofy, or fortifying your board even further with Jack. So we also have 3 other cards that didn't make my deck list, but I wanted to discuss because all of them have been seeing some amount of play in Japan, in the deck lists I've seen anyway. We have the Captain Hook. His basic shtick is he's also an early play from hand if your opponent has a level 3. But on play, he has that pretty standard get big effect for 1 turn cycle, so he gains 4 or 5 until the end of your opponent's next turn. And then when he reverses a level 2 or higher, you blind stock from the top of your deck. Anna here gets big, gets an extra 15 power if all your characters are on trait, and then also makes her lane, gives you anti-damage in that lane. No damage from the effect of autos, which is pretty strong, especially in multiples. And then Sheriff Woody here, by far the least amount of play of any of these cards, but I figured if I was going to talk about 8 of them, I'd throw in the last one just for laughs. He gets similarly big on play, and then also prevents events and backups in his lane, and then also gives 500 times the number of characters you have to another lane on play. So, pretty strong level of power, but probably isn't making the deck when you have the other 8 options available to you.
Yeah, I'm really
So
sad
that's the
about
deck.
that because I think that's one of the funniest looking cards they've ever printed. Good
All
old
of these
Fortnite Woody.
cards look a lot better in person, but still don't look very good. I don't know what Mirrorverse is. I haven't played that game. I just bought the set because I'm kind of locked into it. I've bought all the previous funny sets, so I needed to buy this one too. I'm happy with the power level. The art is what it is. The foils are really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely excited to pick up a couple of those foils because they look really nice. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting set. It's a 2-year-old mobile game that I don't think anybody knew existed, other than the super hardcore fans.
And good for
But
them. I think their
yeah,
set's pretty nice.
yeah,
It's
definitely.
definitely out of the 3 funny sets, the Pixar, Disney, and Mirrorverse, I think Mirrorverse on its own is probably the most playable.
Yeah, I definitely think this deck in particular has so many tools and so many options. It definitely lets you play the game based on how the game shows up to you. You have that flexibility to do whatever you need to at any point in time. And in this game currently where you can just get iced out from the middle of nowhere, it helps to have that extra reach when you need it, or if you're playing into a slower matchup where they don't have all that finishing turn, where you can just generate a ridiculous amount of stock and keep yourself as compressed as possible. So definitely like the flexibility of the deck.
Yeah, and it's nice that they really gave, for a non-8 standby deck, this deck has all the tools it needs to keep up on the power lines with those decks. It's more like Nino, where you're getting really big on turn and then just kind of breaking down your opponent's game plan, instead of getting impossibly big. But you can still have those turns where, for instance, if you double Mickey at 2, you can grab Jack Skellington and Goofy, and then you're kind of gaining 2/5 and hexproof in all lanes, which is kind of big, especially when you're threatening Ian, because you definitely hit a choice, because you always hit a choice. So
Yeah, the fact that you generate as much stock with those angers feeding your free fresh that also costs 1 less than a standard free fresh. It's pretty insane, the fact of how well this deck can actually compress.
So let's move on to what you have in stock for us,
All
Tanner.
right, so moving on to what the dog doing. For those of you who don't know, I had been a massive fan of what I call Doggerella in the Disney 100 deck. So with this new set coming out, I kind of looked into it and I saw there's a lot of really good cards that exist in the Disney that have soul triggers. So if you go ahead and look at the next slide here, we have my deck list that I sent in for locals just this past week. As you can see, a good bit of soul triggers. I'd say the advantage of this deck is that you have a lot of damage. So if we move on to the actual photo of the deck, we get to see a little more of what these pieces are. Overall, you're playing dogs, so obviously you cram all those in as you can. Scrooge is the secret MVP of this deck. Other than that, you have the Chew 2 package from Disney 100, a bunch of generic soul trigger cards at level 1, Pongo to guarantee your pluses with all your dogs. You got Herc to have that extra push, and of course, we have 8 2-soul combos. Disney 100 didn't have any, but we actually have a one from the set, which is that blue evil Elsa. I don't know what they're called, but you can play that by setting your level 1 ghost guys. And now with JP Nats this year, we're going to have this good old 2-soul yellow. So that'll enable this deck to function even better. So if you go to the next slide, we have our game plan. You slam the 2-soul. You got 3 dogs in the front row, you got a Pongo in the back row, and you got a Scrooge in the back row. Your dogs are sit 5k defensively, and on attack they swing in at 5k, plus you're going to trigger every single attack, so your Pongo can give an additional 1k. Guaranteeing at worst case scenario, you swing 5, 5, 8, and it's just like the amount of scaling that these little guys can do is kind of ridiculous. So let's get into the actual cards and why they're there. So first, 15 dogs. Why? They have soul triggers, and you can dog storm. They sit huge. 3 Scrooge. Scrooge, again, as we talked about before, that global 500 power in this deck specifically feels even more gross at 0. You're slamming 2 souls every turn. You're turning your guy sideways, triggering every turn. So if your opponent just cancels early, you can just strand them at 0 by swinging massive, generating your stock, and every turn, even like they can't answer those 5Ks very reliably, so they'll have to find bombs somewhere. A big thing with the Scrooge is pay to salvage anything. Between this and Pongo, you use your 3 if you're really desperate for hand, you use those 3 stock to grab 3 cards, or to grab 2 cards, and then you draw for turn. So you get to always have board. You're never really losing any hand because you play everything that you draw. It's just an engine that should not be as consistent as it is.
It's a time-tested adage. Clock, draw, brainstorm.
Yeah, absolutely. Except this time, we got our boy Pongo, the Dog Stormer. Pay 1, tap it, brainstorm. However, it doesn't hit on climaxes, it hits on those dogs. So you have 15 of them, doubling your odds to hit them. As well as the fact that it can only salvage 1 is the downside. You don't really care. You only need 1 more card. Scrooge gets your other card if you need it. You're slamming your ham and going. Then we got 4 of the shadow guys. On play, they get 5k, and then they die. So these are going to be swinging in huge. Again, your Pongo, you're going to trigger every time. You have 2 cards in this deck that don't have soul triggers. which normally is one on board and you clock the other one, you level it, or you keep it in your hand if you're playing against something like Overlord that you know is going to wipe your Pongo. So you just keep slamming this guy down. He's how you play your Bluetooth Soul, so I typically clock one of these as soon as I can, and then have that be my first level, since we know we're going to see yellow because that's the remainder of the deck. But yeah, moving on to the next two, and here's your other board breakers. You got Pooh. He swings in at base 7 if you have 3 or more other characters. He has a soul trigger. Again, main highlight, main reason we play in this deck is we want to push that damage. The other card here is Rapunzel. She is a global 1k on your turn, and then you can discard a character and spawn a level 0, which would be your dogs or your Scrooge if you lost yours the turn before to some back row targeting effect. It lets you keep up that pressure, keep up the board. Again, we're slamming dogs. Our dogs swing huge on attack. They sit decent on defense. But with this, your Poos become base 8Ks. Your evil dudes are 85s. I mean, the power levels that you get at level 1 is pretty nice. And then again, that's without having that Scrooge for the extra 500, which most of the time you also will have back there. And so what happens when we stop slamming every turn with our guys? We have the Rapunzel Flynn package. Starting with the Rapunzel, if you have a Flynn in the front row, she gets 55, so she sits base 11 and has Hand Encore. Then she gives your Flynns an additional 1500 power, Hexproof, and Hand Encore. Going to the Flynn, and why we only play 3 Rapunzel is the fact that your Flynn has the effect on play, discard a character from your hand, search for that Rapunzel. So you don't need to have more than one of the Rapunzels in your deck. You're only having one of those and 2 of these in your front row typically. 2 or less early play and heals on play. This is your mid game. This is what you do. You put these down. They all sit 11. They all have Hand Encore. The Flynns are hexproof, so you can't get any change. You don't have to worry about tap counter if you swing with Rapunzel first. Everything's going to trigger, so your Pongos are going to give these another 1,000 on each attack, or pump 1 3,000. However you need to split it. Your Scrooge gives another 500. So they're sitting 11-5 defensively. Hand Encore, hexproof. Again, just really big, really tough to remove sticky cards. And if all that doesn't work, we have our next card, Hercules. So if they didn't just randomly die, this is what he's here for. On play, if you have a full board, he gets the 3,000 in that soul, so he has base 3 soul. In this deck, that's essentially base 4, because we're triggering on every lane, like we said. And then on attack, if they cancel, mill 1, burn 1 plus, or burn level +1. In this deck, typically you're going to have that lower burn, which is what we actually want, because the fact that we're pushing so aggressively early, this is normally only going to burn 1, sometimes 2. It's very rare that we'll see it hit those bigger numbers because we're not playing very many level 3s or 2s. So the main purpose of this is to be that cheap ping. The other thing you can do with this is this gives you really good sides. So if your opponent's level 3s are on board, you're siding for 1 because he comes in at 3 soul. You're guaranteed to side for at least 1, sometimes 2. You slam your climax down if you absolutely need to guarantee the cancel ping 1. You can swing absolutely insane. It just gives you, for some reason, this deck feels like you never run out of gas. You just keep going. This is your big push at the end. Typically, you don't get to play this card unless the game's going super slow, because you're pushing them 2 levels, 1 turn, and then trying to just push through those smaller pockets with your sides and with your with your dogs there to try to get those small hits in. So this is your absolute last case scenario, gives you that modularity on how you want to do it. You can just play one of these when you intentionally don't have a full board to not get that extra soul, slam your 2 soul down, side for 1 or side for 2, ping 1, ping 2 based on, your deck state, and have that extra little ping to get them down. But yeah, so that is what the dog doing. 48 cards of soul triggers, 56 total soul triggers. So the name of the game, punch your opponent fast, and as soon as they're in a bad deck state, you just end the game as fast as possible with these massive swings.
My favorite card about this Hercules in your deck in particular is you have entirely a good possibility of swinging for 7 and sending me right to the next round in one clean swoop.
Yeah, the fact that this card gets as massive as it does, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. I absolutely adore it. I mean, if you leave me an open lane, this thing can be an 8 soul swing. Like,
I feel like anything over 4 is guaranteed damage.
Yeah, so the fact that, again, your pings are small. You play a lot of 0s, you play a lot of 1s. So keeps since your top end so small, it helps you get those tiny little pings in, because that's kind of what this deck does, is it hits you really hard in a couple of turns, and then it just kind of cuts you left and right with small hits for 1 or 2 when you need it. But yeah, other than that, here are the normal links that we include in all of our videos. And Dan, do you have any shout outs or any specific calls you want to make for the set or for anything in particular?
Shout out to all my people at locals that have to play against me playing these decks and get absolutely 0 tournament experience out of it. I looked in my box the last WGP and had like exactly 0 modern legal to play. So definitely my local play group. Thanks for humoring me while I play all these funny sets. Thanks for you guys for having me on, for letting me get some of this out of my head. Been keeping all of these Disney knowledges and Pixar knowledges firmly in the confines of my skull for the last couple years, so it's good to finally get it all out.
Yeah, always appreciate having you, and definitely looking forward to getting some more games in, and Stalker Fest coming up here soon. And hey, these sets are legal there, so we can actually finally get a rep in on these in an actual tournament. So looking forward to that as well. So with that, I'm gonna call it here. So have a good one, everybody.
Later.